Greetings fellow humans, my name is Alistair Lord and I am the Renaissance Yorkshireman. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about types of class, so seminar style classes and lecture style classes, class size and targeted and effective feedback and the research that is related to this. But before I get into that, I'd like to talk a little bit first about the Singapore model of maths and how the UK government about 10 years ago were kind of talking about implementing this in the UK system. Why would anyone want to emulate the Singapore model of maths teaching? Well, quite simply, they have the best maths outcomes in the world. So the students that are coming out of the Singapore education system are at least several months or half a year ahead of their peers in other countries, but in many cases at the age of 16 or 18, they're actually effectively several years ahead of their peers in other countries. So they're doing something right in Singapore as far as the teaching as maths goes. So there were some teachers and government officials who went to Singapore and spoke with people in the education system. One of the things about the Singapore system of maths teaching is that the maths teachers in Singapore have 15 contact hours or less per week. So what is a contact hour? A contact hour is when you're in the classroom with the students. So on average, they're doing 3 hours in the classroom with the students or less. So sometimes perhaps only 2 hours a day. Some days 2, some days 3. Now, if you're a teacher and you only have 3 hours in the classroom, that doesn't mean you only work for 3 hours, because you have preparation, you have meetings, you have admin, and you have continued professional development, or at least you should do if you're in an education system worth its salt, but that's another issue. So the UK government said something along the lines of, yeah, but we don't want to reduce contact time to 15 hours, we want to keep it at 25 hours. And the Singaporeans said something along the lines of, well, it's not the Singaporean system then. And this is one of the problems with politicians. So let me just state for the record, politicians should not be making education policy, because most of them come from extremely rich backgrounds. Their knowledge of the education system is extremely limited, and their agenda is primarily one of control, not one of education. Whereas a teacher's priorities, or at least they should be, are learning of the student. And here's the thing, ultimately it's a question of resources. Now, if the UK government had been really serious about instigating the Singapore model of maths in UK schools, they would have put up the money. But they didn't, because they're not really serious. They want the results, but they're not willing to put in the resources. So there's some level of what I would call reality bypass going on with these politicians. They want these results, and the evidence indicates that where you need these resources, X thousands, X millions of pounds, but they're only willing to put in a third X or half X. And guess what? It doesn't work. But that's politicians for you. Class type. In my view, there are basically two models of class type, although there is a third, which is a hybrid model, which takes from both. So in the first instance, you've got seminar style classes. And I argue that with a seminar style class, 16 students or less. Often, in fact, anywhere between 6 and 12, but a maximum of 16. On the other hand, we have lecture style classes. Now, I went to lectures as a student, and sometimes in lecture halls there were maybe 25 or 30 students. Sometimes it was more like 50, sometimes 70. And today with Zoom, you could theoretically do a lecture style class with more than 100 students around the world. I mean, possibly theoretically more than 1,000. But there's a fundamental difference in the style of teaching between lecture style and seminar style. with a lecture style, you may occasionally get questions from students. You may, as a teacher, open it up to questions at the end, but primarily it's the teacher or lecturer giving information to the student, and there is very limited interaction. Whereas with the seminar style class, there's a lot of interaction, and it's a fundamentally communicative and social endeavour. However, in the UK, the system which I came through, the normal style of class is what I would call a hybrid class, and that's being polite. And this is the style that, as a pupil in the primary and secondary education system in the United Kingdom, was the norm for me. And my daughter is 18. She has been through the UK secondary education system and a little bit of primary, and her experience has been the same. And if you come from a lower middle class or working class background, almost certainly this has been your primary experience of classrooms in schooling. So in the UK, there's usually anywhere between about 25 and 35 students in a class. Sometimes there could be slightly less, 22, 23, but in my experience, when I went through the education system, I'd say it's very rare that there are less than 20 students in a class. And 33 happened on occasions. When I worked in the state school system in Thailand, it was anywhere between about 25 and 45. So 35, 40, 45 students was often the norm. And here's the thing, because these reality bypass politicians are expecting teachers to deliver communicative classes when it's a lecture style number. And it just doesn't work like that. If you want a truly communicative style lesson with 30 or 32 students, then go and read Harry Potter, do some magic, wave your wand, expectus patronus. That is not how it works. I mean, it just isn't. Okay, let's have a look at the evidence. The evidence about class size that I'm going to quote you is from the Education Endowment Foundation. And the Education Endowment Foundation are an independent grant-making charity that perform meta-analysis on research to assess interventions in education. Now, what that means is they gather all the research on education that's done all around the world, and first of all, they assess, was the research done well? And they also assess what level of resources are needed to implement particular interventions in education, and then they assess the effectiveness. And their research is bloody excellent. If you're not aware of them and you're interested in this subject, go and look at the Education Endowment Foundation. Here's what they say about class size. Intuitively, it seems obvious that reducing the number of pupils in a class will improve the quality of teaching and learning. For example, by increasing the amount of high-quality feedback or one-to-one attention learners receive. However, overall, the evidence does not show particularly large or clear effects until class size is reduced to under 20 or even below 15. That was my emphasis. Overall, the evidence does not show particularly large or clear effects until class size is reduced to under 20. The key issue appears to be whether the reduction is large enough to permit the teacher to change their teaching approach when working with a smaller class, and whether, as a result, the pupils change their learning behaviour. That was also my emphasis. If no change occurs, then perhaps, unsurprisingly, learning is unlikely to improve. There are a number of issues here. So firstly, reducing a class from 32 to 22 isn't going to help. It just isn't. It's not reducing it small enough. Hopefully, there are many teachers from the UK education system who are watching this video. I would like to think so anyway. And a lot of you may think, oh yeah, but it's better if I can reduce this class from 27 to 22. Well, perhaps you might think that, but the evidence indicates that it's not going to make any difference. The class reduction has to be at least 20 or less, but really 15 or less. And I'll just read the highlighted part of that quote again. The key issue appears to be whether the reduction is large enough to A, permit the teacher to change their teaching approach when working with a smaller class, and B, whether as a result the pupils change their learning behaviour. It's not rocket science, it just isn't. And this brings me to the final piece of evidence from the Education Endowment Foundation that I would like to quote to you. And this evidence is about targeted and effective feedback to students. So, the EEF say this: feedback is information given to the learner and/or the teacher about the learner's performance relative to learning goals. It should aim to and be capable of producing improvement in student learning. Feedback redirects or refocuses either the teacher's or the learner's actions to achieve a goal by aligning effort and activity with the outcome. It can be the learning activity itself, about the process of the activity, about the student's management of their learning or self-regulation, or about them as individuals. According to the EEF, this targeted feedback to students is absolutely one of the most effective interventions. But here's the thing: if you've got a class of 12 students, you can give targeted and effective feedback to all those students on a regular basis. Perhaps not every lesson, but on a regular basis. But if you've got 32 students in the class and a 50-minute class, and you've got to set up activities and elicit language or whatever it is and put people into groups and move them around, and then you try to give feedback to 32 students in 50 minutes, I mean, hello, wake up, it's not gonna work, it's not rocket science. I mean, come on, it can't just be me that sees this, I mean, really. So, targeted feedback. If you want targeted feedback in the classroom, you need a small classroom. It's that simple. One of the changes that teachers can make, facilitated by a small class size, is targeted feedback. But do it with a big class, forget it. It's not going to work, and your learning outcomes are going to be minimal and modest at best. But if you have a modal and median class size of 12, as I argue for post-capitalist systems, you can do targeted and effective feedback on a regular basis, perhaps in every lesson. Certainly with 6 or 8 students, you can do it every lesson. For any teachers, or indeed anyone else who is interested in anything that I'm talking about, all these ideas are in my book, The Tao of Sustainable Development, A New Post-Capitalist Paradigm. And the largest chapter in that book is on education. It's 15,000 words long, and it's pretty much all evidence-based. Thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.